During my college years, I had an arrangement with Mary, the campus beauty, $3,000 monthly to maintain our relationship. She was an enigma. In public, she played the role of a perfect, obedient girlfriend, following my every word with grace. But behind closed doors, she transformed into a playful temptress, her true personality emerging in our intimate moments. That night, as she lay across my chest, her voice carried that familiar mix of charm and stubbornness. "Get off," I said with mock sternness, trying to maintain some semblance of control. But Mary just pouted, her delicate features arranged in practiced disappointment. When I reminded her of our agreement, that this would be our last encounter, she feigned innocence, her lips curved into a knowing smile. Before I could press the point, she silenced me with a kiss, effectively ending any further discussion. The pattern continued, night after night. "When did I promise that?" she'd ask with calculated naivety, making herself comfortable against me. Her persistence in these moments was both frustrating and endearing. On our last night before graduation, in an upscale hotel room, I watched her sleeping form. Her youthful face, slightly rounded and peaceful in slumber, showed none of her usual mischief. The decision weighed heavily on me as I placed the $10 million check on the bedside table. It was more than compensation, it was goodbye. Gathering my clothes quietly, I slipped out of the room. My Ferrari roared to life in the garage, its deep red color matching the emotional turmoil I felt inside. The empty night roads seemed to mirror the void I was creating. My father's ultimatum left me no choice. His words echoed in my mind. Return home or lose my inheritance, my position, everything. As I drove toward the Venus family mansion, I couldn't help but think of Mary, who would soon wake to find me gone. Her reaction played out in my mind, those beautiful eyes opening to emptiness, her voice, slightly hoarse from sleep, calling my name into the silence. In the hotel room, Mary stirred, reaching instinctively for my warmth. Finding only cold sheets, her eyes fluttered open, a hint of tears already forming. She pulled on some clothes, her movements slow with sleep and growing dread. The water I'd left helped her parched throat, but nothing could ease the growing realization as she spotted the check. Her attempts to reach me on WeChat went unanswered, each failed connection confirming her worst fears. "Hey everyone! Wow, what a moment, right? But hold on, things are about to get even crazier. What exactly did Mary put in that drink? And why is she so determined to trap George now? Plus, wait until you see what happens at the upcoming business meeting. Let's just say Jessica's surprise appearance changes everything. You won't believe how George's parents react when they finally discover who Jessica really is. And just wait until you find out the real reason behind the mysterious feud between the Venus and Gigna families. The next part of this story has some of the biggest twists we've seen yet. Will George finally step up as a father? Can Mary forgive him for abandoning her years ago? And what about that surprise ending that brings everything full circle? If you're loving this romantic drama as much as I am, please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to catch all our latest stories. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Share this with your friends who love a good revenge romance with adorable family moments. Drop a comment below. What do you think Mary's true plan is? Is she just getting revenge? Or does she still have feelings for George? Let me know your theories. Stay tuned for the next part. It's going to be absolutely incredible. See you all in the next video. 3 years after that night, fate had a peculiar way of circling back. At a prestigious New York charity gala, whispers filled the air about the mysterious Miss Mary Gignis, daughter of the city's wealthiest family. I hadn't heard that name in years, yet it still stirred something in me. The gossip flowed freely around me, how the Gignis family's only daughter had caused quite the scandal with an out-of-wedlock child. How she'd stood her ground against her parents' disapproval until they finally relented, concerned about her well-being. Standing there with a glass of champagne, Memories of college days flooded back. Our last interaction had been nothing but a cold text message and that check, a poor ending to what we'd shared. The Jigness surname wasn't common, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this could be my Mary. While lost in these thoughts, chaos erupted around me. An orange kitten darted through the crowd, followed by a small child. In that split second, I watched a waiter lose control of his drink tray, sending glasses flying toward the running child. Without thinking, I moved to shield the little one, my expensive suit taking the brunt of the spilled drinks. The child froze in my arms, clearly startled by the commotion. "It's all right," I assured the panicking waiter, keeping my voice calm. These things happen at large events. Looking down at the child still in my protective embrace, I asked softly, "Are you hurt anywhere?" When the little girl, Jessica, remained silent, still processing the shock, I decided to lighten the mood. Removing my soaked jacket, I lifted her with a gentle smile. "How about we find some treats? I heard they have excellent desserts here." As I carried Jessica toward the refreshment area, something about her struck me deeply. Her features held a familiar quality I couldn't quite place, yet they captivated me instantly. There was something in her eyes, in the way she held herself, that seemed to echo through my memories. As I watched the little girl happily devour her treats, her cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk's, an inexplicable warmth spread through my chest. Then came the question that nearly made me choke on my water. "Daddy? Are you my daddy?" "What's your name, sweetheart?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you might have me confused with someone else. This is the first time we've met." But her response sent a jolt through me. "But you look exactly like the daddy in the photo." Before I could probe further, we were interrupted by the arrival of a woman in crisp business attire. The crowd parted respectfully for her, but she moved straight toward us with singular focus. Jessica spoke first, her words muffled by cookies. "Aunt Nicole, what are you doing here?" The woman's eyes hadn't left Jessica since she appeared. "You gave us quite a scare, young lady," she said, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Your mother's been worried. Let's get you back to her." As Nicole lifted Jessica, the little girl reached out toward me, waving enthusiastically. "Goodbye, Daddy Uncle," she called out. The dual title struck me like a physical blow, though I managed to return her wave. Nicole's complete dismissal of my presence felt deliberate, leaving me with an uneasy feeling. Meanwhile, across the hall, a child's voice rang out. "Mom! Mom!" Mary turned to see Jessica running toward her, little legs pumping as fast as they could go. "Slow down, sweetheart," Mary scolded gently, bending down to meet her daughter at eye level. Instead of responding, Jessica buried her face in her mother's chest, an unusual behavior that immediately set off maternal alarms. "What's wrong, baby?" Mary asked, studying her daughter's face. At not quite 3 years old, Jessica was already showing signs of extraordinary beauty, her features a perfect blend of, well, Mary preferred not to think about that. The little girl was thoroughly spoiled by her grandparents. "But you must be George," she greeted me with refined warmth. I returned her greeting politely, but before our conversation could develop, fate dealt its hand. The restaurant door opened, and in walked Jessica, tugging at Mary's hand. "Mom, I'm starving. Can we have steak?" the little girl pleaded. Mary's usually stern expression softened as she indulged her daughter. "Patience, sweetheart." Then our eyes met across the restaurant. Mary's gaze, initially warm from her interaction with Jessica, frosted over when she noticed Danica sitting across from me. Before either of us could react, Jessica spotted me. "Mom, look!" she exclaimed, practically vibrating with excitement. "It's Dad! He's here too!" I watched as Mary's composure wavered slightly, but what caught my attention was Danica's reaction. Her eyes, fixed on me with unmistakable interest, held that particular gleam, the look of a woman who sees something she wants. The weight of Mary's presence, Jessica's innocent joy, and Danica's calculating gaze created an almost unbearable tension in the air. Mary watched from across the restaurant, a familiar bitterness rising as she observed Danica's radiant smile directed at George. Still the same old scumbag, she thought. But then a mischievous idea sparked in her mind. Turning to Jessica, she whispered, "Sweetheart, haven't you been wanting to find your daddy? Well, there he is. Why don't you go say hello? And make sure to call him Dad." Jessica's eyes lit up, but then dimmed slightly. "Can't you come too, Mommy?" Mary shook her head, maintaining a gentle smile. "I'll wait for you at home, baby. Go have some special time with your daddy." Only after Mary's promise to wait did Jessica's excitement return full force. Meanwhile, I was desperately strategizing how to escape this arranged date without earning my mother's wrath. Lost in thought, I barely registered the small arms suddenly wrapping around my leg. A soft, sweet voice floated up. "Daddy, I want steak." The familiar voice snapped me from my planning, and I looked down to find Jessica beaming up at me. Before I could explain to Danica that there must be some mistake, my body moved on its own, scooping the little girl into my arms. Danica's expression shifted from confusion to shock as she studied our faces. The resemblance was undeniable. It was like looking at a perfect blend of two people's features. "I don't understand," Danica said slowly, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping the table. "The Venus family heir isn't married, let alone a father. What exactly is going on here?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating the implications. "Would you believe me if I said I don't know?" I replied helplessly, watching Jessica bounce impatiently in my arms. When the waiter brought her steak, I found myself automatically cutting it into bite-sized pieces, as if I'd done it 1,000 times before. Jessica attacked the meat with gusto, periodically calling me Daddy between bites. Across the table, Danica observed our interaction with growing unease. The natural way Jessica and I fell into a father-daughter rhythm, the unmistakable physical resemblance, it all painted a picture she hadn't expected to encounter during what should have been a simple arranged date. When I finally had a moment alone with Jessica at dinner, I gently probed, "How did you find your way here, sweetheart?" She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes, milk mustache adorning her upper lip, and simply replied, "I don't know." Her guileless response left me both amused and concerned about her parents' apparent lack of supervision. After our meal at the restaurant, I couldn't bring myself to leave her there alone. Taking her to my lakeside villa seemed the only responsible choice. As evening settled in and Jessica sat contentedly drinking her milk, I tried again to learn more about her situation. "Where's your mom, Jessica? She must be worried about you by now." The little girl seemed far more interested in her milk than my questions. "Who do you usually sleep with at night?" I tried a different approach. "What about the big bad wolf outside?" I teased, hoping to prompt some information about her home life. To my surprise, Jessica just raised her tiny fist with adorable determination. "Mommy's not here, so I'll sleep with Daddy. You'll protect me from the wolf, right, Daddy?" Looking at her cherubic face, I couldn't resist giving her chubby cheek a gentle pinch. There was something hauntingly familiar about her features that I couldn't quite place. "Sweetheart," I explained patiently, "I can protect you, but why do you keep calling me Daddy? And your mommy will be very worried if you don't go home tonight." "It's okay," she declared confidently. "Mommy knows I'm with Daddy." She remained stubbornly silent about her mother's identity. Later, after her bath, she snuggled against me, smelling of baby shampoo and something else, a subtle, familiar fragrance that tugged at my memories. As she drifted off to sleep, her head resting trustingly on my arm, I felt an inexplicable sense of rightness. Meanwhile, across town, a very different scene was unfolding. "President," Nicole, the secretary, ventured nervously, "are you sure this is wise?" She was shocked by her boss's casual attitude about leaving Jessica with a virtual stranger, especially given Mary's usual protective nature. "Let her play for a few days if she wants," Mary replied calmly. though there was something calculating in her tone. Nicole couldn't reconcile this relaxed response with the panic she'd witnessed earlier when Jessica had first disappeared. As Mary's longtime secretary, she knew how deeply her boss loved that little girl. This sudden change in behavior seemed completely out of character. "If she wants to come home tomorrow when you check on her, that's fine," Mary continued, her voice measured. "And if she wants to stay longer, that's fine too." There was something in Mary's expression, a hint of a deeper plan at work, that made Nicole hold her tongue despite her concerns. She would miss the little one's presence around the office, but clearly, her boss had something specific in mind. "Won't we be imposing on him?" Nicole asked hesitantly. Mary's response was sharp and bitter. "Imposing? Let him deal with it. That's the least the scumbag deserves." She strode away, leaving her secretary staring after her, puzzled by this uncharacteristic vindictiveness. The next morning brought its own challenges. I watched Jessica determinedly attempting to dress herself, my phone buzzing with urgent work messages. My assistant had already dropped off breakfast, and soon I was juggling a child in one arm and a paper bag of food in the other. After buckling Jessica into her car seat, I handed her a warm bun. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "Uncle has some important work today. Would it be okay if I take you somewhere fun and pick you up tonight?" Jessica nodded cheerfully, her face already smeared with breakfast. "Okay," she chirped between bites. The gates of the Venus family estate swung open as we arrived, our elderly butler rushing to greet us. I knew my parents would be awake. They'd always been early risers. Sure enough, my mother appeared, her expression shifting from disdain at my early arrival to shock as she spotted Jessica. "What in the world?" she began, but her words trailed off as she took in Jessica's features. The child's face, though dotted with breakfast crumbs, was striking enough to render my usually verbose mother momentarily speechless. "Will you stay with Grandma today?" I asked Jessica softly. She studied my mother with curious eyes before nodding. Setting her down, I turned to my mother. "Can you watch her? I have meetings all day, but I'll be back tonight." Before I could escape, my mother's hand shot out to grab my arm. "George Venus," she hissed. "Is this your illegitimate child? She's your spitting image, even prettier than you were at that age." "Mother, be reasonable," I protested. "I'm not even married. How could I have a child? If you don't want to watch her, I'll take her with me." I reached for Jessica, but my mother was faster, scooping her up protectively. "Go handle your business," she snapped, already softening as she looked at Jessica. "The child stays with me. I'll keep her safe." When I returned that evening, exhausted from a day of meetings, I found my parents sitting in the formal living room, their expressions grave. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken accusations, and I knew my day of reckoning had arrived. "Young master," our butler whispered urgently as I returned home, "your parents have been like this ever since the little girl was taken away." A sense of dread filled me, and I contemplated a hasty retreat, but my mother's commanding voice froze me in place. "Come here." "Yes, dearest mother?" I approached with my most charming smile. "How did your meeting with Miss Danica go?" The trap was springing shut. When I remained silent, she pressed on, her voice heavy with disappointment. "If you showed just a bit more ambition, would I still be waiting for grandchildren?" You don't know how heartbroken I was when Jessica left. A week later, Mary stood in the bustling mall, glaring at her ringing phone. She hated work interrupting her precious time with Jessica, but this particular caller made her pause. Turning to her daughter and secretary, she said softly, "Sweetheart, stay with Aunt Nicole for a moment while Mommy takes this call, okay?" After pressing a quick kiss to Jessica's cheek and giving Nicole a meaningful look, she hurried outside. "Aunt Nicole," Jessica's sweet voice piped up once her mother was out of sight, "can I have ice cream?" The secretary looked down at those pleading eyes, torn between duty and indulgence. "But your mommy doesn't allow it." "We'll save most of it for Mommy," Jessica negotiated, her eyes wide and earnest. The secretary's resolve crumbled under that hopeful gaze. "All right, wait right here while I get it for you." Jessica waved her tiny hand reassuringly. "Don't worry." As Nicole joined the ice cream queue, Jessica stood alone, fidgeting with her fingers in boredom. Then she spotted a familiar figure in a black trench coat. Her face lit up with recognition, and she darted forward on her short legs, drawn like a magnet. I was lost in thought, wandering aimlessly through the mall, when something collided with my leg. Looking down, I found those familiar bright eyes beaming up at me. "Daddy, are you shopping too?" she asked excitedly. "Uncle came to buy some things," I corrected gently, though I couldn't help smiling. "What brings you here?" "Mommy brought me to play," she exclaimed, practically bouncing with joy. There was something about her inexplicable excitement at seeing me that tugged at my heart, a connection I couldn't explain but couldn't deny either. "Where's your mommy?" I asked softly, watching the little girl turn her head in confusion. Her big brown eyes darted around the crowded mall, and my heart squeezed at her lost expression. She reminded me of someone, though I couldn't quite place who. "How about Uncle takes you to find Mommy?" I offered, holding out my hand. Instead of taking it, she surprised me by launching herself into my arms, wrapping her tiny arms around my neck and planting a sticky kiss on my cheek. Something about her felt familiar. Perhaps it was her smile or the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. The more I held her, the stronger this strange connection felt. Meanwhile, Mary returned from her phone call to find both her daughter and secretary missing. Her secretary came running back, clutching a melting ice cream cone, panic written across her face. "President, I can't find Jessica. I just turned away for a moment to buy her ice cream." Mary knew her daughter wasn't the type to wander off. Despite her racing heart, she forced herself to think logically. "Let's check the security cameras and split up to search," she said, maintaining her composure even as fear clawed at her chest. This wasn't just any child. This was her precious daughter, the only reminder of that night 5 years ago. The mall's vast corridors seemed endless as Mary searched, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Her feet ached, but the pain couldn't compare to the terror gripping her heart. Just as tears threatened to spill, a familiar voice pierced through the crowd. "Mommy!" Mary spun around to see her daughter running toward her, followed by a tall figure that made her breath catch in her throat. It was him, the man from her past, the one who'd never known he had a daughter. Jessica bounced excitedly, showing off her ice cream. "Look what Uncle bought me," she exclaimed, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. I stood there, studying Mary's face, connecting dots I should have seen sooner. The familiar features I'd noticed in the child, they were Mary's, but there was something else too, something that looked back at me from my own mirror every morning. "Long time no see," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your daughter is beautiful. You should be more careful, though. The mall's not safe for a child alone." Mary's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and something else. "You weren't so concerned about safety that night, were you?" she shot back, her words loaded with meaning. The question burst from me before I could stop it. "Who's her father?" A knowing smile played across Mary's lips. "Why don't you come over and find out?" she challenged. "Unless you're scared of the answer?" I stood frozen, the weight of possibility pressing down on me. The ice cream in Jessica's hand dripped slowly onto the floor, marking time as I faced what could be the biggest revelation of my life. Mary leaned in close, her cherry-red lips brushing against my ear. "She's your daughter," she whispered, her voice a mixture of triumph and hurt. "You ran away back then, so now it's time for your punishment." She punctuated her words with a sharp nip to my earlobe. Later at home, I found myself on the sofa with Jessica, both of us absorbed in play. Mary watched us from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Something about the moment seemed to stir something deep within her, A faint flush colored her cheeks as she moved toward the wine cabinet. She selected an unusual bottle of white liquor, opening it briefly to inhale its aroma before closing it with a satisfied smile. From the refrigerator, she retrieved Jessica's favorite juice, carefully mixing the two together. "You must be tired, darling," she said, approaching us with the drink. "Here's something refreshing." As she extended the glass toward me, Jessica perked up, reaching for it eagerly. "Mommy, I want some too." "Let Daddy try it first," Mary interjected smoothly, pulling the glass just out of Jessica's reach. "He'll get you your own special juice later." Her gaze settled on me with an intensity that made me pause. Under her watchful eyes, I took a cautious sip. The initial burst of fruit flavors masked something unfamiliar. Before I could fully process it, Mary swiftly took the glass back, drank deeply, and then, without warning, pressed her lips against mine. The unusual taste intensified, and realization struck, but too late. Mary finished the rest of the drink with a satisfied smile. A slow warmth spread through my body, and a sense of unease settled over me. "What was in that drink?" I demanded. "Only the best things," she replied playfully. She made a quick phone call to her assistant before turning to Jessica. "Sweetheart, how about a sleepover with Aunt Nicole tonight?" "But I want to stay with Daddy," Jessica pouted. Mary's voice turned syrupy sweet. "Mommy and Daddy need some time alone to work on giving you a little brother." Jessica's eyes widened in excitement, and she nodded eagerly. Once Jessica had left, Mary disappeared into the bathroom. When she returned, she wore a lace camisole that left little to the imagination. "You're not slipping away this time," she murmured. Several days later, at the Venus family estate, an older woman's voice rang with authority. "Listen carefully. You must secure the Gigna family's bid this time. Our family doesn't truly need it, but they've been making things difficult for us these past 2 years. When your father questioned them, they claimed it was because of you." Her tone carried clear frustration. "How is this my fault?" I asked, staring at my mother, caught off guard by the accusation. "How is it not?" she countered sharply, her graceful posture doing little to hide her irritation. "At my age, I still have yet to see a single grandchild." Her words carried the weight of years of expectations. Under her relentless pressure, I found myself headed to yet another bidding conference. Meanwhile, in a luxurious office on the 19th floor of the New York Central Building, Mary sat at her desk, deep in thought. Her eyes lingered on her desktop wallpaper, a photograph from her college days. She had practically begged for that picture. A tall, striking man holding a hiking stick, with a petite woman looking up at him with admiration. Her heart tightened at the memory. "President, the bidding conference is starting soon." Her secretary's voice interrupted her reverie. "Right," Mary sighed, reluctant to face another room full of calculating businessmen. Her attention flicked to Jessica, who was happily munching on a small cake on the office sofa. Their eyes met, and Mary's expression shifted into feigned sternness. "Just how many sweets have you had today, young lady? Are you trying to lose all your teeth?" Despite her scolding tone, she couldn't help but soften. Jessica had been thoroughly spoiled by her grandfather, and being the child of that man, who still had no idea she existed, Mary found it difficult to be too strict with her. "No more sweets, Mommy. I promise." Jessica's sweet voice melted any lingering irritation. Mary walked over, planting a kiss on her daughter's rosy cheek. "Stay here with Annie, okay? Mommy has a meeting downstairs." As she gathered her things, her secretary handed her the conference attendee list. Mary's eyes widened as she scanned the names, her usual composure slipping for just a moment. She quickly handed the document back to her assistant and hurried out. Upon entering the conference room, her gaze immediately found me. While the other attendees sat stiffly, fully focused on business, I leaned back in my chair with practiced indifference. The moment might have passed without incident if not for an all-too-familiar grating voice breaking the silence. "Well, if it is, would you like some wine?" Mary appeared, holding 2 glasses of red wine. Her presence was both familiar and unsettling. "No, thank you," I declined, remembering all too well my limitations with alcohol. "Has something happened?" I asked softly, looking down to avoid her intense gaze. Her response was a look of displeasure. "Drink this glass, and I'll tell you everything," she offered, her beautiful face carrying an alluring yet dangerous expression. I stared at the wine glass, memories of our last encounter making me hesitant. Mary noticed my reluctance and raised her eyebrows, barely containing what seemed like amusement at my discomfort. "He'll drink." I reached for the glass Mary had already sipped from and downed it in one motion. Mary's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but she quickly recovered, finishing the other glass herself. "Now, about our daughter," I began, but Mary cut me off. "Our daughter? Where was this concern back then? If it weren't for me, would you even know her? Since you're here now, why not make things right? With both of us." Her words carried years of hurt. Soon, I felt the familiar warmth spreading through my body. "You drugged yourself too? You've learned some new tricks over the years," I said, both impressed and concerned. Mary's cheeks were flushed, her eyes glistening. "Jessica wants a little brother, you know," she whispered, her voice carrying a mix of playfulness and longing. The next morning, I awoke to a tiny voice beside the bed. "Daddy, the sun is up. Why are you still sleeping?" Jessica sat there in her pink princess dress, complete with a yellow duck headband, watching me with curious eyes. Mary appeared in the doorway. "Finally awake? I've warmed up your breakfast." Looking at them both, I felt a sudden sense of rightness, like missing puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. 3 years later, our life had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Mary climbed onto our bed wearing a pink dress that barely reached her thighs, her feet adorned with cartoon socks, matching ones she'd picked out with Jessica. We all had a pair now, a small symbol of our unity. "Change into your pajamas," I said, holding out her nightwear. "No," she shook her head, pointing to my shirt. "I want that one." "My shirt?" I couldn't help but smile at her request. She nodded, curling up against me like a contented cat. I carefully helped her into the oversized shirt, adjusting it around her small frame. "Ready to wash up?" I asked, looking at her with affection. "I don't want to brush my teeth," she protested, as I carried her princess style toward the bathroom. "You'll get cavities," I warned, marveling at how this stubborn, enchanting woman had become my wife, and how our beautiful daughter had brought us full circle.